and welcome to Rolling with Two. I'm Will, and with me is the one who prepares for winter the best,
Sarah.
And today we're doing a two-player perspective and accessibility for Creature Comforts. Sarah, tell us a little bit about this game.
All right. Creature Comforts is a worker and dice placement game where players are preparing for winter by collecting resources and crafting the coziest items for their den. All right, Will, so how does the game play for two players?
So for two players, you do not have a bot, so there's no nanas in winter. The setup says based on the number of players, whether you're playing a short game, which is 6 rounds, or a long game, which is 8, certain players will get a coin. However, in a two-player game, no matter what length you're doing, 6 or 8, there's no changes.
Right.
So it's actually... It's almost like 2 players is the standard setup, and everybody else has special setup rules, which is very different.
Yep.
Other than that, I think that's the only setup change.
Right. And the reason for the setup change is because the players who get the coins won't be the early bird, which means first in the round to take their turn.
Yeah, every player will have the equal number of times being the first player.
Right. Right. All right, so let's go over some issues in the two-player experience, and we really only identified the improvement cards.
Yes, so in the game, there are a number of different cards, and fortunately, they're all different shapes.
Yeah.
But the square ones are the improvements. Now, this is where most of the player interaction takes place. You build something out, and usually that changes something for you, but it will also affect everybody else, or it's in another space for other people most of the time. Sometimes you can use it, but most of the time it's for other players to go to. So there's a lot of player interaction in there. However, in a two-player game, that might not be the case.
Right. It's just there's fewer players, so there's fewer opportunities for players to use it. So the ones where you get bonus points for other players who have a certain type of comfort card, well, you're relying on one other person. And if they never build that type of comfort, which is very easy to avoid, you're not going to make any points. And then the action spaces, the glade, where players can go and take an action, like you said, some of them you can utilize. And it's usually a really strong additional action, but most of them you have to place your family die. You're not placing a worker on it, so you have to have a die open to place on it. But then there are some that only other players can utilize, and you get a good benefit for it. And again, in a two-player game, you're relying on one other person to use it. And in our games playing, Will, I think, did it once, and I just never got around to building any of those glades. And so it's just for I wouldn't say it's a major part of the game, but for a good chunk of the game, it feels kind of, I can't find the right word.
It's a sizable mechanism that feels underutilized.
Right.
And so what happens is you go through all this trouble of doing it and barely see it go off. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it's not even on purpose.
Right.
It's, yes, I would love to use that. I don't currently have the resources to utilize it, or the extra die, as Sarah was pointing out. I don't have that to spend on it, so I'm just not using it. Not that I don't want to use it, I can't. And same goes for the extra point scoring. Like Sarah said, certain improvements call out for an icon to be present on other players' cards. I'm not avoiding building those cards. It just has never come to me to build those cards.
Right.
So I'm not thwarting her. I'm just I'm just playing my own game, and she's not benefiting from it.
Right. Now, there are a few cards that are specific effects that help that player. It's just you may not see them. And again, in a two-player game, it's just that the row may not refresh because unlike the comfort cards, you can go, you can take the cards, you have them in your hand, worst thing is you might discard them. The problem with the improvements is when you go to that area, you have to be able to build it immediately.
Yes.
You can't reserve it. And each round, the bottommost one is going to go away. So just depending on the timing, how the cards come out, there are 2 copies of every card. You may never see the ones that are player specific come up in your game, or they don't come up at the right time. There's one game where a really good one came out right in the first round at the bottom. So it's the one that got discarded. And neither of us was able to build it because it's just getting the amount of resources needed to build it was just impossible because of all the things that lined up the way it was.
Yeah, it's like 4 resources and 2 of them being harder resources to get in the first place.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know how you do that in the first round.
Yeah, so unfortunately, that's a deck that normally I wouldn't say I want a bigger deck in a 2-player game, but it kind of feels like at least needed more variety. Like, not that I like the idea of reducing the number of copies, but if they had done more variety and in a 2-player game you just take out 1 copy of everything, it just stuff would have been able to come out and would have been built more. Like in one game I think I might have built 1 improvement, and another game I might have built 2, but it was always something I just did kind of at the end of the game because I had nothing else to do rather than trying to get something that was going to be helpful to me. And I love the concept of those the Glade spots, but that's a topic for the next video.
Yes.
All right. So the good news is that was really the main issue we found in a 2-player experience. And what it does well is there's less competition for those comfort cards. So that's really nice.
Yeah, they have it so that anytime someone takes a card from the comfort row, it automatically gets refilled. So you're always going to have a choice of 4. And they have multiple copies of every single card. So if you miss out one, well, hopefully you can dig and get some more later. It's just how much effort you actually put into that space. And there's nothing really stopping or blocking, because you don't even have people preventing you from using a space to get a card. The best competition that actually happens is someone just happens to take the card you want.
Yeah, but the great thing is there's 2 spots, one that allows you to take from the row that are face up, but if you don't like any of those but you want new cards, you can go to the other spot and just draw off the top of the deck. So
Or use both.
Or use both, because they're individual spaces. You can put a worker on each one and get a lot of cards and get a lot of options. So getting comfort cards is not difficult, and it's just nice in a 2-player experience. You're not going to be competing as often, at least in our experience. If I saw Will going after a certain thing, generally speaking, I was like, there's so many other options of things that can combo. I'll just go for something else, because it's not worth denying him the points if I can't get the extra points.
Yeah.
It also plays really quickly. I mean, that's just kind of how a lot of games in 2-player, experience typically goes. Fewer players, it just goes faster. Yes, placing out the workers is a simultaneous action, but then after that, resolving goes in turn order. So it plays quicker.
Yeah, the being able to place all the workers out at the same time really cuts down on the time frame for most people playing this game. And even when it's time to resolve workers, the way all of that works out, even though the first person's taking their turn and they may take a little while, the other players have all the information they need. So when it comes time for them to resolve, it goes really, really quick.
Yep, exactly. The other interesting thing that we experienced is that it can actually foster a higher sense of cooperation, which is kind of odd in a competitive game.
Yeah, so there's no competition in terms of I'm first to this thing, so I win. No, it's everybody's just doing whatever they can, so you're kind of isolated in that respect, with a few exceptions of player interaction. However, the mechanism in this game is you put out your workers, but in order for them to activate, you have to use dice to essentially trigger them.
Right.
And you have 2 family dice in your color and 4 shared community dice. So there's not a lot of I'm going to mess up your stuff because
Right.
I can't. The only real dice that I have are mine, and you can't touch them, and I can't touch hers. And even the community dice, I think there's like one improvement that can change like one of them.
Yes.
So it is what it is out there. And I found on one occasion I could actually mess with one of the community dice, and I looked at it, and there was no way for me to actually mess with Sarah. So instead I asked her, well, is there anything I can do to help? And she goes, well, I'm planning, you can see where all my workers are. I guess I'm going to be using that even dice. So I made another one even. And by doing so, she was able to use it, and she was able to use my glade that I had built, giving me an effect for helping her just by doing stuff in the game. So it's not a very cutthroat competition. Right. Mm-hmm. It's a more cheerful, we're all little critters in the forest, just preparing for winter, and hey, let's see what we can do.
Right. And there are some effects, and I think it was mostly the Travelers, where you had to give resources to other players. And I mean, the worst thing I did, I think, was give you resources you didn't have, but that actually ended up helping you.
Yes. In fact, I was like, wow, okay, that's exactly what I needed. Right. So thank you.
But then he had to give me resources too, and he ended up giving me resources I didn't have, and I was able to utilize them because it opened up what I could do. So it's not, don't get us wrong, this is not a cooperative game all of a sudden. It's just, it feels friendlier.
Yeah, it doesn't feel punishing, like, oh my god, I have to do this action if I'm going to do this, and I'm going to give her all of this stuff, and it's going to feel awful. No, it feels like, okay, here, have a mushroom, have some yarn, I'm building socks type of thing.
Right.
And that's a very unique experience for a competitive game, especially at this kind of mid-weight that we're at in terms of game weight.
Agreed. All right, let's move on to accessibility. So unfortunately, there are some challenges. In the comfort cards, the icons and their backgrounds are a little hard to see. They're not terrible, so I think most people are going to be okay with them. But a lot of the icons are on backgrounds of similar color. So there's just not a high contrast. So if you have more severe vision issues, you may have trouble literally seeing the icon pop off of the background.
Yeah, well, like for example, I have both color blindness and vision impairment, and so with the images blurring, it's then really hard for me to distinguish what is background, what is picture, and with it all being in the same color family, it takes a lot longer for me to figure them out. I don't think a person with general color blindness will be unable to play this game.
Right. But I will have to say, even for me, it took me a little bit more time to parse the image from the background. Like, not a whole lot, but it's the difference between being able to glance and easily see, okay, that's yarn, that's wood, that's stone, versus maybe picking up the card, looking at it a little bit closer and being like, okay, that's everything I just said. The good news is, like, one of the best ones is a red apple on a green background. So that one really pops. That's really easy just to glance at and be like, oh, that's an apple. But like I said, I think the wood one is probably one of the worst because it's
the grain for me, the yarn.
Yeah, grain, yeah.
I'm not great with the mushroom.
Right. So this is just another one of those things kind of for publishers to keep aware of. We understand using color to reinforce the coloring of your icon, but it shouldn't be so close that it blends. It should pop so that people can just glance at it and say, okay, that's what that is.
Yeah.
Also, I think I'm going to make a general statement, then we'll go into some more specifics. Generally speaking, many of the fonts in this game are a little hard to read. None of them are going to be like terrible, but some of them just have parts of letters, cursive or whatever, that are just, like I said, just a little hard to read. They're not as clear as fonts as they could be.
Yeah, they have extra angles to the lettering so that it's not immediate, like, is that an A? Arno? Arnie?
Yeah.
It's one of those. And by the context, oh, okay, I know what it says now.
Right. So specifically the comfort card. The comfort cards. The font for the what do you call it? The ability at the bottom. It's a little hard to read, but not like terrible because at least it has good contrast. It is white on a dark background, so at least it pops. But it does take that a few extra seconds for someone with relatively normal eyesight. I mean, I'm nearsighted, but it takes me a few extra seconds to read it to make sure I've got the words.
Yeah. I would say most of the problems in this are all what I'd call at a glance issues, where I can't necessarily get everything at a glance. I have to stop and I have to study. What are these resources? What does this say? Those type of things.
Yeah.
Not impossible, just
right.
At a glance stuff is like, no, this one's going to take a little bit of time to hold up, examine, then understand.
Right. And the ones that are the worst, thankfully, are titles.
Yes.
So there's the Dreams Come True micro expansion. The titles on those are a little hard to read, but again, it's the title. There's a different font for the description, the ability or whatever it is you're trying to go for, so that's fine.
Yeah, I just gave up on the dream titles. I was like, nope.
Yeah.
What does this do?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay. And by the way, we should mention that the Dreams Come True micro expansion currently is only available in the Kickstarter edition of this game, which is sad because I kind of like having it. I feel it gives it depth. But
right.
If you see a Kickstarter edition, the Dreams Come True cards will be in there.
As well as the talents, which I love the talents. So I know we shouldn't talk about it here, but those two aspects are going to be Kickstarter. So hopefully at some point they'll be available maybe as a promo pack that they could be purchased. But as of recording this, they're still delivering to people, to the Kickstarter backers. So.
Yeah, but back to titles.
Yes.
Also, the Traveler cards.
Yes, I have to pick up those Travelers. I have to really look at it. The contrast is horrible. The font is very light, tannish color, and the backgrounds are kind of the same. It's small font. It's cursive. It's, like I said, I mean, not the worst example I've ever seen, but I'm surprised they decided to blend it so much. Mm-hmm. Granted, I guess it's not, again, a huge thing, but a traveler comes into town, I'd kind of like to know what it is, especially because they're animals that I'm not completely familiar with. So I like to learn. I want to know what these animals are, and that's where you learn, because they don't give them names like Rick and Susie, but
it's a pine marten.
Yeah.
It actually names the animal.
Right. So that's where we're talking about some of the font choices. Thankfully, the worst ones are in the title. Now, talking about the Traveler cards, unfortunately, here is a comprehension issue. And that is specifically the rules do not fully explain
the iconography.
The equal sign, the not equal sign. Thankfully, there's only 3 cards where it really is challenging, and only one that's really, really challenging, and that's the common loon. I'm not even sure if I can read it correctly, but on the left side it has a resource of any type and a not equal sign above it, and then the green arrow with the die symbol with a question mark, and then it goes over to a resource of your choice with an equal sign. This could be interpreted several different ways, and we're not going to go into them too much here, but there's nothing in the rules that explain exactly how that works, especially when some of the other ones use the equal sign and the not equal sign differently.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, the rest of the rule book, I would say, is phenomenal.
Yes.
It is clear, easy to understand, and there's only like 12 travelers.
Yeah.
So it seems like a glaring error for it to be left out that they didn't take all the travelers and just explain it out in plain text what this iconography means, because it's the only time they actually get tricky with the iconography.
Right. Otherwise, most of the other ones are trade an apple for a coin. Okay, probably not that type of thing, but it's trade a specific thing for a specific thing, or trade a thing of your choice for something else. And the tricky part is sometimes it's a number of how many times you can do the trade, or it's based on the die that you place it. But like I said, for that loon, it's not equal on the left side, equal on the right. So it's like how many times you do it is equal to the die. But again, it's a bit confusing. Is it supposed to be
The
different?
amount of trade?
Yeah, the amount
number
of trade.
times you can
So if
trade?
you put a 3 on there, are you supposed to do 3 not equal resources for
Three
of the same resource? But on the other hand, it's a die. That's how many times you do it. So is that unique trades? Because there's other ones where it's like trade 2 of the same for something, and it does it a number of times. Well, we would think that you could then say, okay, I'm going to trade 2 apples for the thing. I'm going to trade 2 mushrooms for the thing. And you do that as many times as you're allowed to with the conversion, but you could use a different pair each time. So again, they just needed a guide. And all I can say is I hope that they create one, post it online, so that it's available and I can print it out and leave it in the box. Like I said, the Common Loon is just probably the most challenging. And I think people are probably going to interpret it because we could interpret it at least 3 different ways.
Yeah. I think we went with the safest issue and kind of what we felt went with the other types of travelers in terms of power and just went with that, but we're not certain.
Right. And I think it's probably okay as long as all the players at the table agree, and then you do the same thing. I mean, granted, it's only going to be 1 round for that game, so as long as everybody that round does it, but you should decide on that before people place their workers.
Yeah.
So nobody's like, well, that's not how I interpreted it, kind of thing. So unfortunately, that is a cognitive challenge that hopefully, like I said, at some point, they will post a full guide that explains every single one of the travelers so there's no misinterpretation on what the iconography means. And like Will said, the rule book is really great for everything else. They probably just made an assumption that it made sense to them because they designed it, which is unfortunately a fallacy Will and I have.
Yep.
We have done that too. I mean,
I think most designers come to that
designers
problem.
are going to do that no matter what. So hopefully they can fix that eventually. All right. I guess the only other thing is, as we've kind of talked a little bit around, there's a Kickstarter version and a retail version. And the Kickstarter version comes with shaped meeples and shaped resources.
Which we feel are a lot more accessible.
Right. I couldn't find, as of this recording, really any pictures of what the retail version looks. I found a couple. So in the retail version, the cardboard resources are slightly shaped around the icon. So hopefully, for those who have more severe vision issues, you'll still be able to feel the shape difference with the cardboard pieces. But the good news is, at least right now, the shaped meeples for the player pieces as well as the resources are available. Meeplesaurus, as well as Kids Table Board Games, the KTBG website currently has them available. So if you are finding you have a retail copy and you're finding it difficult to tell the resources apart, again, this is just for those with more severe vision issues like Will has, where you need shape to tell the difference.
They are out there.
They are out there.
And I think also Meeplesaurus had the Kickstarter edition.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know how many copies, so
Right.
I'd recommend it.
Yeah, and that brings us to our last point. If you have the shaped meeples, there is a color issue between the red fox and the purple squirrel. They're not that different. Now the picture on your screen right now is not. It's more. When you take a picture, the camera can actually see better than our eyes.
And it's backlit.
And it's backlit, so it looks more distinct in the picture. But if you have it in front of you, they do kind of blend. Now, the great part is they are different shapes. But if you're just at a glance looking for your color, you could easily mistake it.
Yeah,
But
again, the at-a-glance issues creep up in this game.
now, to solve this problem, Meeplesaurus does have an even more upgraded Meeple pack that has very distinct player pieces for the different animals. However, there's been a few, not complaints, but people noticing they don't match the colors in the game at all. But that could be a good thing. If you're trying to get it so that they're different colors, that's a good thing. They're more, what would I call it, realistic. So like the porcupine in the game is blue, But this porcupine is gray because porcupines, I believe, are generally actually gray or at least not blue.
Bluish gray?
Bluish gray. So you get more realistic ones with that. I think that's it for accessibility issues, which unfortunately, again, it seemed like a lot, but it really what just boils down to that at a glance problems.
And we're nitpicking at this because of how much we actually respect this game.
Yes. So let's go on to what it does right. Thankfully, if you're trying to calculate the points, it's very easy to see. They did a white number on a red heart. It's perfect. It's clear. It's everywhere. It's always shown the same. Fantastic.
Same for the special creature comfort cards that refer to whether or not they're a piece of clothing or their food. In the upper right-hand corner, you have white on dark backgrounds, so you can easily see, oh, there's a snowflake, there's a cooking pot, there's a shirt, and you can easily see that at a glance.
Yep. And then while a lot of the information can be closed information, one of the things that's really great is the improvement cards are completely open information always because they're always face up on the table. So again, anybody who's having more severe vision issues or just the fact that some of those improvements become glades, if you can't see it either because you're just too far away from it or whatever, someone else can read it to you and remind you what it does. So that is all the accessibility, the good and the bad. So let's move on to the conclusion.
So for 2 players,
I would recommend it. Now, we did kind of mention a little bit, this is a bit more of a midweight game. It's still what I would call a very family-friendly game, but it's not your introductory family game. So that is something to note because this company, Kids Table Board Games, sorry, I always trip over that, generally up to this point has made much lighter family weight games. So this is going to be a little bit more on the mid-weight. But for 2 players, it is still a very good experience.
Yes, 2 players. This is what you graduate from after you've gotten a number of gateway games under your belt. I actually, though, would recommend that 2 players play the long version because we did play the short version. And that, I think, is great for a learning game, but it did not feel great for a 2-player game when we were playing it again after we knew what we were doing. So I definitely prefer for a longer term game so that we have the time to see more player interaction where we feel some of the game mechanics are a little weak.
Right, exactly. It is those improvement cards which you need time to get the resources to be able to build those, because generally speaking in the first 2 to 3 turns, it's going, or 2 to 3 rounds, it's gonna be really hard to build the improvements. Now, it's possible, don't get me wrong. It's just more difficult, especially with everything else that's going on. So 2 to 3 rounds out of 6, you're already halfway through the game if you're only playing 6 rounds.
Yeah.
So I agree with Will. 6 for a learning game. First time ever playing it. That way, if you totally make mistakes, at least it's not going to punish you too long.
Yeah.
Not that the game's punishing, but still, 8 is definitely a much more fulfilling length.
Now, accessibility.
I would still say yes. For those with more severe vision issues, you're going to need some assistance either from a device or from other people. Again, most of the accessibility issues are more at a glance, or unfortunately the flavor issues, flavor text, the titles and things like that are going to be challenging to read. So, but I would still say it is generally accessible.
Yeah, I would agree. Everything is just inconvenience.
Yes, it's
an inconvenience of I don't immediately get all the information, but it's visible.
Yes.
It's there. All the mechanics taken in isolation are easy enough to understand. It just can be a little overwhelming for someone, which is why we don't recommend it being a gateway game. It's definitely an intermediate game, but still not too heavy either.
Oh, no.
So yeah, accessibility wise, it fits in terms of a usable game that's not going to stop you at any one spot, except maybe the travelers.
Yeah. Now here's I hate to put it this way. You can always take the loon out of the deck. If everybody at your table just cannot agree on what it does. The good news is there's 12, and at max, you're going to use 8 of them. And then the other two that have the equal and the not equal sign, they make a lot more sense. So again, it's still just the group having to decide on how it works with the multiple times that you can do it. Whether it's, if you have to do 2 same, that it's the 2 same for all 3 instances, or just, you can do 3 different pairs, that type of stuff. So you could always take the loon out of the deck, at least until the company provides more information on how exactly they envisioned it to work.
Or you can feel proactive and do a little bit of BGG research, see what other players are doing, create your own document, and that's how you play it.
Yep, that's true.
But accessibility-wise, it's okay.
Yep.
All right, that will do it here for Rolling with Two. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach us on the various social media platforms at
Rolling with Two, that's TWO. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And on YouTube, please like and subscribe.
And why would you ever prepare for winter alone when you could be Rolling with Two?